These truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Fulton, Missouri, in America's heartland. In March of 1946, Fulton was a sleepy college town of 12,000 people, about to face the biggest day in its history. Only 6 months after the end of World War II, one of the true giants of the 20th century arrived in President Harry Truman's home state.
Truman thought it'd be just wonderful if he brought the great Winston Churchill out to Missouri to make a speech. He loved the idea of bringing the Prime Minister to a small college in the middle of Missouri that nobody ever heard of.
Just a wonderful day to have not only the President of the United States in town, but Winston Churchill, the Lion of England. And so everybody was excited. It was, you know, the atmosphere was charged. It really was.
But Churchill wasn't there to celebrate. He had come to sound an alarm.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
Behind that curtain, after the war, the countries of Eastern Europe had been trapped under Soviet domination.
I remember even feeling kind of indignant that the Russians weren't playing fair, weren't being nice.
Churchill told America there was still a tyrant left in Europe, the Soviet dictator, Joseph Stalin.
Joseph Stalin was a real son of a bitch. There was a real brutality.
When Stalin heard about Churchill's speech, he called it an act of war.
It was presented as the imminent attack of America on Russia.
The United States and the Soviet Union had been allies in World War II. Now they would turn against each other. The Cold War would last for more than 40 years. Time magazine publisher Henry Luce had predicted that an American century would follow the end of World War II. And by 1946, the world was beginning to witness it. While the map of devastated Europe was redrawn at conferences in Yalta and Potsdam, across the Atlantic, America had emerged from the conflict stronger and more prosperous than ever before. And yet America would be called on again. And in that sense, Churchill's speech was both a warning and an exhortation. If the free world needed a protector from the evils of Stalin, it would have to be the United States of America. In the fall of 1945, the Second World War, history's greatest armed conflict, was over. America's sons and husbands and fathers were coming home.
I flew to Burbank, and my wife met me. That was great. She was beautiful as usual, and she normally doesn't wear a lot of makeup, but she had makeup on. It was running down her face.
Oh, it was the most thrilling, exciting time of your whole life. There's nothing compares to coming home to your loved ones. It was heaven. That was heaven. I mean, I was just a kid. I was just barely 20, I guess, when I got out of service. There was that whole strangeness of having been so fully committed to the war, to danger, to whatever it was you were doing, then suddenly a kind of decompression chamber which was filled with uncertainty.
Returning veterans had reasons to worry about what peace would bring. Factories that had worked around the clock during the war now had few jobs to offer.
All the GIs were coming home. There were no jobs. And I found a job for $1 an hour, refinishing damaged refrigerators from freight yards. Dirty, lousy job, but I took it.
Even before the war ended, the government realized that the transition to civilian life would be difficult. In 1944, Congress passed the GI Bill of Rights. It guaranteed vets low-cost mortgages and higher education.
Think of what that would mean. Fantastic. People go to medical school, dental school, do anything they wanted, paid for by the government. It paid me to study the history of English poetry at Harvard, of all things, just the way it paid somebody else to study a very practical and utilitarian subject in South Dakota. It was absolutely democratic and indiscriminate in the highest sense.
Veterans would, after a brief lull, be swept into an American economy rich in unprecedented productivity and opportunity.
We were the arsenal of democracy. All you had to do was throw a switch and go from producing tanks and airplanes and jeeps to cars and refrigerators. By 47, 48, the economy was zooming.
The driving force behind the booming economy was the American consumer. There hadn't been much to buy during the war. Americans had built up their savings and now they were ready to spend.
We had gathered this phenomenal strength that we didn't know we had, and we were living twice as well. Everybody was. Wages, productivity, everything had just increased in a way that no one had ever experienced.
The newly vibrant economy and the need for veterans' housing would inspire one entrepreneur to transform thousands of acres of New York potato fields into a new kind of American community.
We believe that every family in the United States is entitled to decent shelter.
Navy veteran Bill Levitt imagined thousands of homes here, and he devised a way to build them fast.
Levitt's genius is that he understands that you bring the assembly line to the location, that you flatten the potato field, you mark it off, and in come the teams, slab men, tile men, window men, painting guys. They could do, I think, 18 houses in the morning, 18 in the afternoon, 180 a week, and $8,000. You could buy a great house. It was an amazing thing, and for the first time you had this whole society moving into the middle class.
The Levitt approach spread across the country, making life in the suburbs affordable for millions.
We got our first house, very small, 700 square foot, but we were thrilled with it. 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. Good night. It was wonderful.
My recollection of those years is sunshine and flowers and blue water and mountains and a place where you could do almost anything you wanted, no matter what. I think we were in the middle of the endless promise.
It was quite wonderful. We started our family in 1950, and it was just a time when we were young and everything was before us.
This sense of limitless optimism led to the most dramatic demographic change in American history, the baby boom. Between 1946 and 1952, American families added 25 million children to the population.
It was a great era for white males, but for women, I think there was really a very narrow conception of what women were made for. They were turned into breeders.
Women had it tougher, gave up their careers for their husbands in order to stay home and have babies. I was raising kids, and I was married to a Marxist and I was married to a fascist, and neither one of them ever took out the garbage.
So that it was a step back for women, I guess you'd have to say, and it wasn't much of a step forward for blacks either.
Nearly 1 million black Americans had fought for their country in World War II. They returned home to an America that continued to discriminate against them.
They had been to Europe
where they were regarded as heroes. So to come back to the South, still having to go to the back of the bus, not being able to sit downstairs in the movie theater, it was an ironic kind of return to a country for which we had risked our lives.
President Truman was so angry about the treatment of black veterans that he demanded change.
He sent a civil rights message to Congress, which was the first civil rights message ever sent to Congress by any president. And he'd made the decision to order the desegregation of the armed forces and of the federal government. Very important.
Something else very important. America's national sport was changed in the late 1940s. In 1947, Jackie Robinson joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, the first black man to play in Major League Baseball.
Huge moment, and particularly because baseball really mattered then.
When we saw a black ball player, the only one, step out onto the field, our hearts were with him because we wanted him to succeed. They'd call him all kinds of names, the nigger and that stuff, trying to rattle him. But Jackie kept us cool.
At the end of his rookie year, Jackie Robinson, in one national poll, was voted the second most popular man in America, behind only Bing Crosby.
We're talking about the American dream, best years of our lives. You know, we want American democracy to work, and here he comes, and he's a very intelligent, proud person, and he does brilliantly.
So in America, the years right after the war were a time of broken boundaries and seemingly limitless possibilities.
I think the period from 1946 till the early 50s was the greatest time ever. It was like this country was being reborn in many ways. So many new developments were coming along.
We felt pretty good about the good old USA. And although there were things happening all over the world that were threatening, we were, after all, number one.
Churchill said that after the war that the United States commands the world, bestrides the world, I think he said. And I think we felt that.
You were so proud, and being an American was the best thing in the world, and boy, nobody could get us. We could always lick the bad guys. That kind of faith, that kind of belief, that kind of security was so special.
In much of the world, America was special and essential to the future of those countries devastated by war.
Europe had waged suicidal war upon itself. There was England, and it was a victor, but it was exhausted. France was a victor, but it was humiliated. Soviet Union was a victor, but it had lost 20 million people.
The magnitude of Soviet losses would leave that nation determined never to be so vulnerable again.
For ordinary people, it was tremendous tragedy because in every Russian family there was somebody killed at the front. Officers and soldiers returned to burned out villages. People began